The Mafia boss saw a familiar smile. The single-mom waitress's son looked just like him. The rain didn't just fall in Pierfield, it executed a sentence. It hammered the cracked asphalt of Newark's regenerating waterfront, turning the Passaic River into a churning, lightless void. Across the slick road, the Blue Finch Diner was the only beacon of warmth, its neon sign bleeding cobalt and yellow onto the wet pavement. Inside, Olivia Grant was wiping down the chrome counter for the third time, the scent of bleach failing to cut the comforting smell of old coffee grounds. It was late, past the dinner rush and into the graveyard quiet. At 27, Olivia moved with the efficient exhaustion of a woman running a race. She knew she couldn't win, but couldn't afford to stop. Under the counter, hidden from the few remaining truckers nursing their mugs, her world was coloring. Jules, all of 3 years old, was humming, his small hand gripping a green crayon as he attacked a picture of a dinosaur. He was the quiet center of her storm, the reason she worked this late shift. The bell above the diner door chimed, a harsh sound against the drumming rain. 2 men in dark, expensive suits entered first, their eyes doing a professional sweep of the room. They were granite bookends, flanking the man who followed. Antonio Corsetti. He was 38, but wore the authority of a man much older. He wasn't just wealthy, he was foundational. His name was whispered in relation to Harbor Hound, the legitimate scrap metal and logistics empire that had revitalized the port. His name was also whispered in relation to the quiet, invisible currents of money that flowed beneath it, washing the city's dirtiest cash clean. He moved to shrug off his wet coat, and then he froze. His gaze had landed on the space beneath the counter, where Jules, hearing the door, had looked up. The boy, seeing a new face, offered a wide, unreserved smile, the kind that only a 3-year-old possesses. Antonio stopped breathing. The air in his lungs turned to ice. It was impossible. It was a ghost. It was the exact, precise smile from a faded photograph he kept locked in a fireproof safe, a picture of himself as a teenager, a moment of joy before the world had hardened him. He turned his head slightly, a reflexive attempt to hide the shock, to break the gaze. His hand, hidden in his pocket, found the cold metal of his lighter. His thumb traced the engraved AC as his knuckles went white. One of his bodyguards leaned in, his voice a low rumble beneath the sound of the rain. "Sir, the meeting with Silas is confirmed for midnight." Antonio gave a stiff nod, his eyes still fixed on the floor near the counter. Olivia felt the shift in the atmosphere. The diner, her diner, suddenly felt small and cold. She recognized him from the local news segments about the port's revitalization. Antonio Corsetti, the man who owned half of Pierfield and controlled the other half. She forced her shoulders to relax, grabbing a menu she knew he wouldn't read. As she stepped forward, a small red light flashed on the doorbell camera mounted by the cash register. It was the motion sensor. Someone was on their small patio, standing just out of sight of the windows, lingering too long in the downpour. "Welcome to the Blue Finch. Just coffee. Or will you be eating?" Olivia kept her voice steady, professional. Before Antonio could answer, Jules popped up again. He held up a small, sticky piece of orange candy. "Do you like orange candy, too?" Jules asked, his voice bright and clear in the quiet diner. Antonio looked at the boy. The man whose voice could freeze boardrooms and break unions found himself completely adrift. He opened his mouth, but only a rough breath escaped. He cleared his throat. "I do," he managed, and the words sounded foreign, cracked. A low foghorn mourned out on the river. The smell of the rain and the metallic tang of the water mingled with the aroma of the fresh pot Olivia had just brewed. Olivia's heart began a heavy, painful climb into her throat. It wasn't just that Antonio Corsetti was looking at her son. It was how he was looking. It was a look of dangerous, consuming recognition. Her hand instinctively moved to Jules's shoulder, pulling him fractionally closer to the safety of the counter. The other bodyguard, the one who hadn't spoken, checked his phone. "Boss, ACCA is running spot checks at the South Bend. They're ramping up. Antonio tore his eyes away from the boy. The mask of the executive, the boss, slammed back into place. Coffee. Black. To go. Eat fast. He snapped at his men. Leave fast. Olivia turned to pour the coffee, her hands steady only through sheer force of will. On the small television mounted in the corner, a local news anchor was discussing a new state initiative, the SES, the Corridor Enterprise Act, a new, streamlined, state-level RICO statute designed to prosecute complex business crimes. She swallowed, the coffee feeling like acid in her throat. Her freelance work, the late-night know-your-customer verification she did for a shadowy crypto startup, felt suddenly terribly connected to the kind of men who were now standing in her diner. She placed the cups on the counter. Antonio paid with $100 bill, his fingers brushing hers. His skin was cold. "Keep it," he said, his voice flat, all trace of the earlier stumble gone. His men were already at the door, holding it open. Antonio walked out, but he stopped on the threshold. He turned, his shoulders broad against the screaming rain, and looked back one last time. Jules, mission accomplished, was smiling at his dinosaur drawing. Antonio stared at that smile. It hit him not like a memory, but like a physical blow, a familiarity so deep it was painful, a connection he could not place and could not ignore. He turned and vanished into the storm. An hour later, Olivia locked the front door, the bolt sliding home with a heavy, final click. Jules was asleep in his stroller, exhausted by the late hour. She did her final sweep, checking the back door. It was locked, but something was on the floor. A 4x6 glossy photograph had been slid under the gap, her stomach hollowed out. It was Jules, taken earlier that week at the local playground, laughing as he went down the slide. It was a clear shot, taken from a distance. In the bottom corner of the photo, drawn in a sharp black ink, was a small, stylized symbol, a hawk. Its wings spread, as if in a dive. The photograph burned in Olivia's hand. She stood in her small apartment kitchen, the door locked, chain slid, and a chair wedged under the knob. It was almost 3 a.m. Jules was asleep in his crib, oblivious, but Olivia was wide awake, suspended in a cold, sharp-edged fear. The hawk symbol meant nothing to her, but the act of surveillance meant everything. It dragged her back, against her will, to a night she kept buried. 3 years ago, a different storm, a hurricane that had knocked out power across half the state. She'd been stranded, her old car dead on the highway shoulder, the Sable Motel. It was the only shelter for miles, its sign flickering on a dying generator. He had been there. A man with no name, just a rain-soaked coat and eyes that seemed to hold the same electrical charge as the sky. They were strangers, trapped by the weather, sharing a single candle and a bag of stale pretzels. He never told her his name. She never asked. It was a single, desperate, anonymous night of warmth in the middle of a blackout. When the sun rose, he was gone. He'd left a wad of cash on the nightstand and a silence that felt louder than the storm. 9 months later, Jules arrived. She had buried that night, filed it under survival, because her life was already too full of storms. Miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the dark river, Antonio Corsetti was also remembering a storm. He was 22, running a no-paperwork transport up the turnpike when the hurricane hit. His crew had sheltered him at a roadside motel, a shithole called the Sable. He'd been restless, wired, walking the dark halls. He remembered a girl, her face mostly shadows, laughing at the absurdity of it all. A laugh that cut through the howl of the wind. He'd woken before dawn, the job pulling him away, leaving money he wasn't sure she'd even take. He'd never forgotten her, in a life built on names, ledgers, and leverage. She was the only genuine unknown, a ghost with a soft laugh. Now, Olivia's life was a fragile balance. The Blue Finch diner paid for rent and diapers. The other job, the one she did after Jules was asleep, paid for the illusion of a future. She was a remote KYC analyst for a crypto startup called Latticequill. The company was technically legitimate, but its clients were Phantom's anonymous wallets, shell corporations based in jurisdictions that didn't exist on maps. She verified identities, flagged suspicious transactions, and tried not to think about who was moving the money. Antonio's life was a different kind of balance. He was trying to go straight, or at least straightish. Harbor Hound Recycling was his flagship, a massive, genuinely profitable container and scrap operation. He'd built a charitable foundation. He sponsored city leagues, but the old network, the plumbing of his father's organization, still ran dark and deep beneath the clean facade. You couldn't just turn off that kind of money, that kind of power. The photograph of Jules, the hawk symbol, shattered Olivia's fragile peace. She knew exactly who to call, and she hated it. The MIBU, the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau, months ago, during a routine check on Latticequill. An agent had noted her sharp eye for spotting fake IDs. They had invited her for coffee, suggesting she could be a great help to the city. She had seen the strange data overlaps between Latticequill's clients and companies bidding on port contracts. She had politely declined. Now, she made the call. She met an agent in a 24-hour pharmacy, the fluorescent lights humming. She showed him the photo. The agent's eyes were sympathetic, but his voice was firm. "This is port business, Olivia. This is Corsetti territory." He gently suggested that if she wanted real protection, the kind that would stick, she should consider becoming a confidential source. "Help us understand the port's vulnerabilities," he'd said. "In return, we can make sure you and your son are safe." It felt less like an offer and more like a finely threaded net. Antonio was also moving. He didn't call the police. He called his own, the Ghost Yard, his internal security team, specialists in data, surveillance, and shadows. "Find who took this," he ordered, forwarding a photo of the hawk symbol his diner guard had discreetly snapped. "Find out who is watching that diner." The report came back in hours. The hawk was the old Corsetti family crest, one his cousin Silas had adopted. Silas Corsetti, a rival, a man who embraced the blood and chaos Antonio was trying to wash clean. Silas was hunting for a weakness, and he had just found one. The next day, a new email landed in Olivia's spam folder. The sender was anonymous. The message was 6 words. "Jules's biological father is a Corsetti." The floor dropped out from under her. Her blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. Corsetti, the Sable Motel, the man in the diner, the man with the eyes. It couldn't be. In his office, Antonio had done his own research. He'd had his most trusted aide retrieve a box of his old high school yearbooks and family albums from the vault. He laid them open on his glass desk. He pulled up the diner's security footage on his monitor, freezing the frame on the moment Jules had smiled up at him. He held a photo of himself at 16, awkward, beaming after winning a wrestling match, and placed it next to the screen. It wasn't just a likeness. It was a copy. The exact curve of the smile, the small dimple that appeared on the left cheek, the way the corner of the eye crinkled. It was a 99.9% match, undeniable and terrifying. 2 decisions were made, miles apart, under the same gray Newark sky. Olivia stared at the anonymous email, her fear hardening into a sharp, protective resolve. She had to know. For Jules. Antonio stared at the 2 images, the boy on the screen and the ghost in the photograph. The calculation was immediate. If the boy was his, he was in mortal danger. If he was his, he was a Corsetti. Both of them decided to find the truth, unaware that their separate paths were about to converge, pulling 2 different kinds of storms, the underworld and the law, directly toward the Blue Finch Diner. The spotlights hit Pier Field like an interrogation. Flashing blue and red, the ACCA vehicles swarmed the tarmac of Antonio's cleanest berth. It was a surprise inspection, announced with the sharp crackle of bullhorns. But Antonio knew it was theater. He stood near a container crane, projecting absolute calm as agents sifted through manifests he knew were immaculate. Miles away, in a dark office, Silas Corsetti watched a grainy live stream. His own operative, hidden in the shipyard, was feeding him the video. Silas added his own narration for the private channel of shadow investors he was trying to poach. "Look at the great Antonio," Silas sneered at his phone. "Federal heat. How long before the legitimate front crumbles? He's distracted." The fallout for Olivia was faster and quieter. The next morning, an email from Lattice Quill landed in her inbox. Her account was temporarily paused, pending an internal audit. It was a termination notice wrapped in polite corporate language. The timing, coming just one day after her call to the Mibu, felt like a deliberate amputation. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Rent was due in 5 days. That night, she was closing the diner, her mind racing, when a figure stepped from the alley. A young man in a baseball cap, his face obscured. He didn't speak, just pressed a thick white envelope into her hand. "Community support," he mumbled, and vanished. Inside, she found $2,100 bills, $2,000. It wasn't charity, it was a hook. The request for a meeting came not as a call, but as a prepaid phone left on the diner counter by one of Antonio's men. The location, the dry cable station. It was a cavernous old warehouse, its industrial bones now housing a stark, modern art gallery. Antonio was waiting by a massive sculpture of twisted steel. He was out of the suit, dressed in a dark sweater and slacks that made him seem less like a boss and more like a predator at rest. "He's watching you," Antonio said. There was no greeting. "My cousin, Silas, the hawk is his mark. He took the photo of Jules. He offered protection. 2 men, unmarked car, stationed a block away. They won't approach. They will only watch. Jules will be safe." Olivia wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't," she said, her voice strained. She wouldn't trade one jailer for another. "I won't be in your debt, Mr. Corsetti. I don't belong to you." "He doesn't care who you belong to," Antonio replied, his voice flat. "He only cares that you might belong to me." Silas moved his own piece on the board. A courier delivered a padded envelope to her apartment, addressed only to Jules's mother. Inside was a lab report from a place called North Star Diagnostics. It was official, embossed. It detailed a 99.997% probability of paternity between a John Doe sample and Antonio Corsetti. It was a brilliant forgery. To Olivia, it looked like the truth. Her world tilted. With the report was a small, typed note. "Antonio will take the boy. He can't help himself. Help me secure the clean births. Give me the data you found at Lattice Quill, and I will guarantee your safety. You and Jules can disappear. Safely." She didn't reply. The next day, she took Jules to the park, her nerves screaming. She heard it before she saw it, a high, electronic whine. A commercial drone, black and insect-like, hovered just above the tree line, its camera lens a dark, unblinking eye. It followed them. As she turned the stroller to flee, a black sedan screeched to a halt, a window lowered, and a man pointed a device that looked like a radar gun. The drone shuddered, its lights flashed erratically, and it dropped from the sky, crashing onto the pavement. The sedan sped off, heart pounding. Olivia ran to the wreckage. Painted on the drone's chassis was the stylized hawk, the Corsetti Group emblem. Antonio's men had jammed the signal, but the drone itself was his, or his family's. He was fighting his own shadow. The Mibu called again. The agent's voice was no longer sympathetic. "He's meeting you. He's jamming surveillance drones. You're involved. Olivia. Your past witness." They pushed. "We need you to wear a wire. He comes to the diner, serve him coffee. Let him talk about the port. It's the only way we can guarantee your protection." Olivia felt sick. The lines were blurring. The law felt just as dirty as the criminals. Antonio, meanwhile, was excavating his own organization. His investigation into Silas led him to a network of ghost crypto ATMs, unregistered machines placed in the back of bodegas and laundromats. Silas was using them to churn cash, and he was using undocumented, underage laborers to service and transport the money. Children. That was the one line Antonio never, ever crossed. A cold, dark rage settled over him. Silas wasn't just a rival, he was a cancer. Fueled by the fake DNA report and the terror of the drone, Olivia agreed to meet Silas, a public parking garage, the air thick with the smell of concrete and oil. Silas leaned against a pillar, smug and confident. "You think Antonio is your savior?" Silas said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "He swallows people. Olivia, he'll take that boy and he will erase you." He slid another photograph across the hood of a dusty car. It was Jules, standing by the chain-link fence of his preschool, taken that morning. "I can be anywhere." Or, Silas smiled, "You can be safe with me." The preschool photo broke Antonio. How did Silas know the location? He pulled the security footage from the diner, from that first night. He watched his men. He saw Tino march, his junior driver, a kid from the neighborhood, a kid Antonio had personally mentored, while Antonio was frozen, staring at the boy's smile. Tino had leaned over the counter, laughing. He'd ruffled Jules's hair. "Cute kid, boss," he'd said. He wasn't nuzzling a child. He was confirming a target. The mole was inside his own house. The city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. The threats were coming from all sides: the law, the underworld, and the man who was, according to a lie, her son's father. That night, Olivia sat in her dark kitchen, shaking. Her phone buzzed, a new text from an unknown number. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was an offer. "If you're scared, blink the kitchen light 3 times. I'll come." The storm broke just after midnight. It did not arrive gently. It was an assault of wind and water that seemed determined to peel the old brick from the buildings. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a sharp, concussive sound that rattled the windows in Olivia's apartment. A moment later, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died. The power grid had failed. The baby monitor on the counter clicked off, plunging the apartment into a profound and sudden darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the howl of the wind and the relentless, driving rain against the glass. Olivia sat at her small kitchen table, the glowing screen of her phone providing the only light. The fake DNA test from Silas lay beside her, a pale rectangle in the gloom. She was cornered. The Mibu wanted to use her as bait. Silas wanted to use her as leverage. And Antonio, she had no idea what he truly wanted. Her hand, acting almost of its own accord, reached for the heavy-duty flashlight she kept on the counter. She stood, her heart hammering, and walked to the kitchen window that overlooked the alley and the fire escape. She raised the flashlight, aiming it at the damp brick wall opposite. She pressed the switch. 1. She clicked it off. On. 2. Click. On. 3. Click. She let the flashlight drop to her side, her chest tight. It was a desperate, foolish move. She had just signaled a man who lived in a world of violence, a man who might be, impossibly, the father of her child. A full minute passed. There was nothing but the sound of the storm. She felt a flush of shame, of desperation. Then, a sharp scrape of metal on metal echoed from the fire escape. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A dark shape was ascending the rungs, moving with a fluid silence that was more unnerving than the thunder. The old living room window, the one with the broken latch, slid upward with a soft groan. Antonio Corsetti folded himself into her apartment. He was a man made of shadows and storm water. He was soaked, his expensive black coat dripping a puddle onto her worn hardwood floor. Rain ran in rivulets from his dark hair, tracing the hard lines of his face. He did not move toward her. He simply stood by the window, bringing the cold of the outside world in with him. 5 minutes, he said. His voice was low, cutting easily through the roar of the wind. No lies. "You knew about the window," she whispered. "I know about the building." He took a single step, stopping just outside the small kitchen. Silas sent the fake test. "How do you know it's fake?" "Because if it were real," Antonio said, the logic brutal and cold, "I would never have let my rival be the one to deliver the news." He saw the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. "He's trying to box you in." He's using you to get to me. I won't be a piece in your game, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. I won't have gunmen outside my son's preschool. I won't have drones watching him play. The drone was his, Antonio corrected. My men jammed it. He's using my family's old symbols to create chaos, to make it look like I'm the one threatening you. I don't care which of you it is. Stay away from us. I can't. The words hung in the air, simple and final. I offered protection. You refused. I will not be in your debt. I won't have your men on my doorstep. Then they won't be on your doorstep, he conceded. A car, a block away, unmarked. They don't engage. They don't approach. They only watch, and they deter. Let me keep him safe. Olivia, that's the only treaty I'm asking for. She looked at the dark doorway to Jules's room, where her son slept. Oblivious. A block away, she whispered, her voice tight. They never enter this building. They never speak to me. Done. The tension in the room did not dissipate. It changed. It became something sharper, more personal. He was still dripping, a subtle shiver running through his shoulders. You're soaking, she said, the maternal instinct overriding the fear. She turned to the kitchen sink, grabbed a clean dish towel, and turned back. She stepped toward him. The space between them became electric. A flash of lightning lit the room, turning him into a stark silhouette, illuminating the exhaustion etched around his eyes. She could smell the rain on his coat, the ozone from the storm, and something else beneath it all, clean and male, like soap and faint, old coffee. Her hand lifted with the towel, but she hesitated. He did not take it. He just watched her. He moved with a deliberate slowness, giving her time to retreat. He reached up and his cold fingers brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. The touch was a jolt, burning her skin. His hand did not leave. It cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. It was a question, asked in the absolute silence, with only the storm as a witness. Her breath hitched. She did not pull away. He leaned in. The kiss was not a collision. It was a discovery. It was hesitant, then searching. It tasted of the rain he had walked through and the bitter coffee that stained his words. It was salt and shadow. Her hands came up, not to push him away, but to grip the front of his cold, wet coat. His other hand found the small of her back, his palm flat, pulling her closer. It was not an act of possession, but of grounding. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in the storm, and she felt the coiled, contained strength in him. Her heart hammered, no longer from fear, but from a terrifying, profound recognition. Just as the kiss deepened, just as the heat began to build, they both pulled back, a fraction. Their foreheads rested against each other. They were breathing the same air. We need the truth, Antonio said, his voice rougher now. The control cracked. He stepped back, putting a crucial foot of space between them. Not Silas's version. He looked toward the window. North Star Diagnostics, the lab Silas used for the forgery. The director, Dr. Shaw. She's reliable because she owes me nothing. We can do a real test, a sealed test, my sample. And one from Jules, no names, just codes. The results will be delivered only to you. I will never see them unless you show me. He saw the fear return to her eyes, the fear of what the truth meant. This is not to take him, Olivia, he said, his voice fierce. This is to protect him. I cannot fight a war for a boy who might be mine, but if he is mine, I will burn the ground Silas walks on. Olivia's gaze sharpened, cutting through the emotional fog. If it's true, she challenged, her voice quiet but strong. If he is yours, will you get out? Will you leave the dirty side of the docks? Will you cut the lines? He seemed surprised, as if no one had ever had the leverage to ask. I already have, he said. Harbor Hound is clean, the foundation is clean, but the old network, it's still attached. He met her gaze. If he is mine, I will not just withdraw, I will sever the arteries, for good. A soft cry came from the other room. Mommy! The spell shattered. Antonio instantly retreated, moving back toward the window, putting the shadows between them again. He was the boss once more. Olivia rushed to the bedroom, scooping up her half-asleep son. She held him close, her body still humming. Antonio stood at the open fire escape, the wind and rain lashing his back. He looked at the mother and child, a portrait of a life he had never known. He touched his fingers to the wet window frame. "I'll make this right, Olivia. I promise you that." He swung out into the storm and was gone. Olivia barely had time to slide the window shut before a new sound, harder than the thunder, hammered on her apartment door. "Miss Grant Mibu, open the door. We know he was in there." Olivia, holding Jules, her lips still tingling from the kiss, stared at the door. They had been watching. She walked over and opened it, leaving the chain secured. The agent from the pharmacy was there, his face red, rain dripping from his hat. "We saw him leave. Corsetti, was he here? Did he threaten you?" He held up a small black device, a digital recorder. "We need you to take this. Keep it in your apron. We need to know what he's planning." Olivia looked at the agent, then at the wire, and her fear finally solidified into a cold, hard anger. "He didn't threaten me," she said, her voice like ice. "He came to check on my broken window latch. I'm tired. Please leave." She closed the door on the agent's sputtering protests. Across the river, Antonio stalked onto the tarmac of Pierfield. His men snapped to attention, staring at their boss, who was soaked to the bone, his face a mask of cold fury. "Shut it down," he commanded. "Boss, the night shift is just clocking." "Shut it down." Antonio ripped off his wet coat and threw it to the ground. "Lock down Pierfield. 48 hours, no containers in, no containers out. I want a full sweep. Every ledger, every shell company, every employee manifest. I want Silas's fingerprints scrubbed from my operation. I want us clean. Cleaner than clean." His men scrambled. Antonio Corsetti had just declared war, not with bullets, but with bleach. Dr. Leda Shaw was a woman of precise, unshakable routines. North Star Diagnostics was her fortress, a sterile, white-and-glass lab that ran on data, not drama. Antonio had been an early investor in her genomic research, and she repaid him not with loyalty, but with an absolute, incorruptible neutrality, which he valued far more. The samples arrived via 2 separate, bonded couriers an hour apart. Subject A, a buccal swab collected by Olivia at her pediatrician's office, was labeled with only a randomized case number. Subject B, a vial of blood drawn from Antonio in his own office, was labeled with a different one. "It's a complete blind name protocol," Leda explained to Olivia over a secure, encrypted call. "The technicians running the sequences will only see data points. Your names and his name do not exist in the same file. I am the only one who holds the key to match the case numbers. The results are ironclad and legally indefensible, should it come to that." "Thank you, Doctor," Olivia said, her voice thin. "This is data, Miss Grant," Leda replied, not unkindly. "It isn't destiny, just data." But Olivia knew that was a lie. This data was a bomb. While she waited, she worked. Her analyst mind couldn't let the $2,000 in the envelope rest. She had to know if it was a hook or a lifeline. She started at the public library, tracing the mumbled phrase, community support. She searched public records for nonprofits, filtering for port-related entities. It took her 3 hours to find it. The Seagull Wing Fund, a registered charity dedicated to funding vocational scholarships and waterfront community projects. Its board was anonymous, but its largest benefactor, listed in the public tax filings, was Harbor Hound Recycling. It was his. The money was from Antonio. He hadn't just offered protection, he had already given it, quietly, in the only language he seemed to know. Antonio, in his now partially frozen port, was conducting his own investigation. The lockdown had turned Harbor Hound into a fortress, and he was auditing the weakest link, his people. He had Tino March brought to his office. The young driver, barely 20, was pale and shaking. Antonio didn't shout. He slid a single piece of paper across his desk. It was Tino's scholarship application for a logistics certification, paid in full by the Seagull Wing Fund. "You were my investment, Tino," Antonio said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I paid for your future." Tino broke. "He said you owned me. He said this was just paying the real debt." "Silas." "Yes," Tino whispered, tears of terror in his eyes. "He said he knew you were getting soft, distracted. He heard a rumor about a kid. He just wanted me to confirm what the kid looked like. If he looked like you, he said if he could prove to the dark investors that you had an heir, that your focus was split, they'd back his play to take the berths. He threatened a child. Tino, he used you to do it. He promised he wouldn't hurt him, boss. I swear, he just wanted the information." Antonio looked at the young man, a product of the very neighborhood he was trying to save, now corrupted by the side of the life he was trying to leave behind. Get out of my city. If I ever see your face in Newark again, Silas will be the least of your problems." The Mibu, enraged by Olivia's refusal to cooperate, retaliated with the full force of the bureaucracy. A uniformed officer served her at the Blue Finch diner during the peak of the lunch rush, ensuring maximum humiliation. It was a subpoena. She was being compelled to testify before a grand jury as a person of material interest regarding the finances of Harbor Hound Recycling. The agent who served her leaned in, his voice low and venomous. "You obstruct this. Miss Grant, we will be forced to file a report with Child Protective Services, your association with known organized crime figures, your unstable employment. It doesn't paint a good picture of a stable home." They were threatening to take Jules. The panic was so total, so cold, it burned, but it lasted only a second. It was replaced by a sharp, crystalline rage. She was done being pushed. She took the bus downtown to a small, cluttered office above a bakery. The sign read, Marla Inez, Civil Rights Law. Marla was fast, sharp, and had built a career fighting institutional overreach. Olivia laid out the entire story, the first invitation for coffee, the pressure to become a source, the request to wear a wire, the public subpoena, and finally, the explicit off-the-record threat against her custody. Marla Inez listened, her expression growing tighter. When Olivia finished, the lawyer leaned back, a dangerous smile on her face. "Oh, they really stepped in it," Marla said. "They didn't just subpoena a witness. They harassed a source, threatened her with custodial blackmail, and endangered a minor child to secure an illegal investigation. We're not just answering this subpoena, we're filing a federal grievance for prosecutorial misconduct and source endangerment." Silas, feeling the squeeze from Antonio's internal audit and the new ACCA presence, launched his own missile. He leaked a video. It was grainy, shot from a phone across the street from Jules's preschool. It showed Antonio, in his dark suit, standing by the chain-link fence. One of the teachers, a young woman, walked up to him and handed him a small, white envelope. Antonio took it, smiled, and put it in his pocket. The clip, devoid of context and audio, was sent to a notorious local gossip blogger. The implication was immediate and toxic. The mob boss was making payoffs at a preschool. Antonio's phone exploded. It was a thank you card, the school's director yelled at him over the phone. "The Seagull Fund paid for the new playground equipment I asked you to come. The envelope was a drawing from the kids." But the truth was irrelevant. The image was out. The combined attacks had the desired effect, the ACCA, seeing the public video, the Mibu's sudden interest, and Silas's anonymous tips officially launched Operation Hawk. It was a broad, sweeping investigation targeting both Corsetti factions. The port was partially frozen by federal order. In her apartment, Olivia watched the news report on her small TV. Her entire world was shrinking, the walls closing in. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Miss Grant." The voice was calm, precise. It was Dr. Leda Shaw. "The sequences are run, the comparison is complete, the results are ready." Olivia's hand gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles were white. "I am securing the physical report now. It will be in my office safe, ready for you, before nightfall." The line clicked dead. Her heart didn't just beat, it missed, it stumbled, a painful lurch in her chest. In his penthouse, Antonio stood at the window, watching an ACCA patrol boat motor slowly past his silent berths. His hand, resting on the cool glass, was shaking. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor. He was no longer in control. The truth, the one thing that could either save him or destroy him, was in a sealed envelope across town. At North Star Doctor, Leda Shaw printed the single-eyed definitive page. She folded it, slid it into a heavy manila envelope, and sealed the flap. She did not write a name on it. Instead, she took a red evidence sticker and placed it over the seal. With a black pen, she wrote on the sticker, "One truth." She placed the envelope in the floor safe, spun the dial, and locked it. 2 fates. He arrived without a sound, not a knock, just a short text message that lit up her phone. "I am outside." Olivia let him in, her hand trembling slightly on the deadbolt. He was in the same dark coat, but he was dry tonight. In his hand, he held a single, heavy, 9x12 manila envelope. It seemed to suck all the air from the small apartment. Jules was asleep, his bedroom door cracked just enough for the whale-shaped nightlight to spill a faint, peaceful blue glow into the hallway. The contrast between that blue light and the man standing in her living room was a physical ache in Olivia's chest. They didn't sit on the couch or at the table. As if pulled by the same invisible gravity, they both sank to the worn rug in the center of the room, facing each other. The envelope lay on the carpet between them, a silent, ticking bomb. Antonio pushed it forward, an inch at a time. "It's yours, Doctor. Shaw delivered it to me an hour ago. I haven't opened it." Olivia's hand covered the envelope, her fingers tracing the stiff paper, the sharp edge of the red seal. But she did not open it. She raised her eyes, shadowed and raw, to meet his. "Before this," she whispered, her voice tight with a lifetime of held-back fears. "Before this paper says anything, I have a condition. Not for me, for him." She nodded toward the blue glow. "If this says what you think it says, if you are his father, I will not raise my son around bullets. I won't have him grow up thinking sirens are a lullaby, or that men like Silas are just business rivals. I won't. I'll take him, and I'll disappear where even you can't find me." Antonio's expression was unreadable. He simply watched her, absorbing the ultimatum. Then he leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, bringing his world into her small space. "I have lines. Olivia," he said, his voice low, intense. "Lines my father didn't have, and lines Silas crosses for sport. I don't move people, ever. I don't touch anything involving minors. I don't allow that product into schools or neighborhoods. I've been trying to go clean for 5 years, but it's like trying to sever an artery that's still pumping. Harbor Hound is legitimate. The foundation is legitimate." He looked at the envelope, then back at her. "But the old network is still attached. I've been signaling a separation. I haven't forced the cut." She searched his gaze, looking for the practiced lie of a powerful man. She found only a hard, brutal honesty. She took a shuddering breath. "Okay." Her fingers, shaking, fumbled with the red seal. It tore with a sound like a dry rip, loud in the silence. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was dense with scientific text, markers and alleles she couldn't understand, but her eyes found the bottom line. She read it, then read it again, her mind refusing to process the words. Probability of paternity. She read aloud, her voice a hollow echo of itself. 99.997%. The paper slipped from her fingers. "Oh, God!" The words hung in the air. 99.997. There was no doubt, no ambiguity. It was a fact, as solid as the floor beneath them. A single tear cut a hot path down Olivia's cheek, then another. It wasn't just fear. It was a sudden, crushing relief. The not knowing, the ghost of the Sable Motel was finally over. The what if was gone, but the what now was a terrifying, dark chasm opening at her feet. She covered her face with her hands, a small, choked sob finally breaking free from her chest. Antonio did not move. He did not grab her, did not try to fix it. He simply waited, his hands clenched on his knees, giving her the dignity of her grief and her fear. He watched her shoulders shake, this woman who had carried this secret, this burden, alone for 3 years. Finally, she lowered her hands and looked up at him. Her eyes were raw, vulnerable, and asking 1,000 questions she couldn't voice. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, she gave him permission. Only then did he close the distance. He moved from his side of the rug, kneeling in front of her, and gathered her against his chest. It was not the desperate, rain-soaked kiss from the fire escape. This was an anchor. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand splaying wide across her back, holding her steady as the sobs finally broke. He was solid and warm and real. He was her son's father. He held her until the shaking subsided, until her breathing quieted. She leaned back, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady, slow beat of his heart. He lifted a hand, his thumb gently, almost awkwardly, wiping the tear tracks from her cheek. His skin was rough, but his touch was exquisitely careful. He lowered his head. The kiss was deep, slow, and full of the words they couldn't say. It was a kiss of shared fear, of sudden, terrifying belonging, of acceptance. The faint sound of rain began to tap against the window, a soft percussion to the silence in the room. Slowly, as if moving in a dream, he shifted, pulling her with him from the floor to the old, comfortable armchair by the window. It was a tight fit, forcing an intimacy, their legs tangled, her head tucked beneath his chin. His jacket slid from his shoulders and pooled on the floor. Forgotten. Her hand found the strong column of his throat, her thumb tracing the pulse that beat there, steady and strong. His hand moved from her back, his fingers drifting up, tracing the line of her jaw, then lower, to the delicate, vulnerable curve of her collarbone. His touch skated along her skin, sending a jolt of pure, sharp heat through her, a heat that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with a profound, undeniable connection. Her breath hitched. His own breathing was just as unsteady. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, his lips pressing against her skin. Not a kiss, just a presence. The sensation was overwhelming. The small, safe world of her apartment felt like it was tilting, the walls themselves pulling back, leaving them exposed. The heat between them became a silent, roaring thing. And there, in the darkness, with the sound of the rain and their own ragged breathing filling the air, they simply stayed, balanced on the knife edge of a new, terrifying reality. Later, they spoke in whispers. The intimacy shifted, becoming tactical. They were co-conspirators now, bound by a shared secret and a shared enemy. "Silas won't stop," Antonio murmured, his voice back to its quiet rumble, his lips still close to her ear. "He thinks he has me cornered. The ACCA, the video. He's pressing his advantage." "Then we need a 2-layer plan," Olivia said, the analyst in her surfacing, finding comfort in logic. Something for the feds and something for him, legal and underworld. "I agree," Antonio said, "for the legal side. Marla Inez. I'll give her the real Harbor Hound books, every clean manifest, every bill of lading. We'll invite the local press for a full transparency audit. We'll show them exactly what a clean birth looks like. We'll feed the ACCA a win, but it will be on our terms." "And the underworld?" she asked. A coldness entered his voice. "Silas's crypto ATMs, he thinks I don't know the full network. He's arrogant, we'll use his mole. Tino, to feed him a false cargo manifest, a ghost container. When he makes his move to steal it and plan his own, we'll trap him." Olivia pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. The blue nightlight illuminated the hard line of his jaw. "I'll help. I'll be your compliance consultant. I'll be the public face of the audit. But I need more than your word. Antonio." "What do you need?" "I need a signature." She slipped from his lap, retrieved a pen and a piece of paper from her desk. "You're divesting fully from the 3 high-risk areas, the crypto ATMs, any fog cargo," she used the industry term for gray market goods, "and the loan sharking. All of it. You sign it, a contract, between us." He looked at the paper, then at her. He recognized the test. It wasn't a legal document, it was a vow. He took the pen, without hesitation, without negotiation. He signed his name at the bottom of her handwritten terms. He handed the pen back to her. The look that passed between them was more binding than any ring, more permanent than any ceremony. Across the river in a damp, echoing warehouse, Silas Corsetti was rallying his crew. He called them the Night Crane Team. "Antonio's bleeding," Silas snarled, his voice full of manic energy. "The feds are on him, and he's distracted by the waitress. Tonight, we hit berth B12. He's got a high-value container sitting there. Clean manifest. We're going to swap it, plan our own, and let the ACCA find it tomorrow. By dawn, Antonio Corsetti is finished." The salt-laced wind off the river was cold, carrying the metallic tang of the shipyards. Silas Corsetti's Night Crane team moved like ghosts, black-clad figures slipping between the massive, silent stacks of containers at berth B12. They were professionals, cutting the perimeter fence with barely a whisper, disabling the first 2 cameras with practiced ease. Silas was watching from a van half a mile away, his adrenaline high. "He's stupid," Silas muttered, watching the infrared feed. "The great clean Antonio. He leaves his most valuable container sitting like a duck. We're in." At that exact moment, Olivia was in her kitchen, using the prepaid phone Antonio had supplied. Her voice was digitally distorted, her words precise, fed to her by Antonio's team. "Anonymous tip," she said, her own heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm looking at a white utility van, license plate 7QRT388. It's servicing an unregistered crypto ATM at the corner of Ferry and Polk. They look armed." She hung up, her hands shaking. This was the first move in the second, darker game. The effect was almost immediate. 10 blocks away from the port, an ACCA Special Task Force, already on high alert from Operation Hawk, picked up the call. It was a Corsetti-linked operation, right in their new jurisdiction. Within 2 minutes, sirens erupted, howling into the night. The sound carried clearly to the waterfront. Silas's men froze. "Cops!" one hissed. "They're not coming here." Silas snapped over the radio. "It's a different op, but it's too hot. Get the container, now pop the seal." The sirens, however, were not moving away. They were cutting off the eastern access road, exactly as Antonio's team had predicted. The ACCA, hunting the crypto van, was unintentionally creating a net, funneling all traffic and all escape routes directly toward the waterfront and the waiting trap. Just as Silas's men put the bolt cutters to the container's heavy lock, a different kind of assault began. Hard. Insistent pounding echoed through Olivia's apartment building. "Miss Grant Mebu, open this door right now, or we're arresting you for obstruction of a federal investigation." Olivia's blood ran cold, but before she could move, a new voice, sharp and clear, cut through from the hallway. "Officer, are you currently threatening a civilian, and are you aware you are being recorded on a live feed with 5,000 viewers?" The pounding stopped. Olivia ran to the peephole. Marla Inez was standing in the hallway, her phone held high, her expression one of pure, righteous fury. "My client," Marla announced to the 2 stunned MIBU agents, "has already filed a grievance against your bureau for this exact pattern of harassment. Your attempts to strong-arm and threaten her, and by extension her child, are now a matter of public record. You will leave this property, or I will have you both sanctioned before breakfast." She shoved her phone closer, the screen showing the agents' red, furious faces. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen. You're famous." At berth B12, the lock snapped. "We're in," the team leader said, pulling the heavy steel doors open. It was not dark inside. A sudden, blinding white light flooded the pier. The entire inside wall of the 40-foot container was a bank of high-intensity LED screens. They flickered to life, projecting a single, massive image Silas Corsetti's face, taken from his own driver's license, magnified 20 feet high. Silas, in his van, watched his monitor go black as the feedback loop fried the camera. What is it? What's happening? The answer came from above. The whir of drones filled the air, not police drones, but commercial media drones. Antonio had, 3 hours earlier, invited 3 of Newark's biggest news outlets to a midnight demonstration of new port security protocols. They were all in the air, capturing the scene. The trap had sprung. The ACCA sirens, drawn by the new commotion, finally swerved onto the pier, their spotlights catching the night crane team, frozen like deer in the humiliating glare of their boss's giant portrait. "It's a trap!" the team leader screamed. "Pop smoke!" Canisters hit the concrete, and thick, gray smoke instantly obscured the berth. It was total chaos. Men were shouting, sirens were screaming, and the media drones hovered, trying to cut through the haze. In his office, Antonio watched the feeds. His head of security looked at him, waiting for the order. "No one engages," Antonio said, his voice cold. "My men do not fire. This is an ACCA scene. Prioritize the perimeter. Get the civilians out. Let them be the ones to find the evidence." In her apartment, Olivia heard the chaos, the sound of a city at war with itself. She grabbed her keys, a wild maternal instinct telling her to run, to get Jules, to go to Antonio. Her phone buzzed, a text from him. "Hold Jules, that is your front line." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She let her keys drop. She walked to her son's room, sat on the floor by his crib, and willed her heart to stop beating out of her chest. Amid the smoke, Antonio's security chief spotted him, Tino March. He wasn't running. He was crouched by a junction box, hidden from the cameras, a laptop plugged into the port's mainframe, frantically trying to erase the hard drives. 2 of Antonio's men emerged from the smoke, lifting Tino off his feet. He was dragged, silent and terrified, into a dark warehouse. Antonio was waiting. "They'll put you away for 20 years, Antonio said, not unkindly. "Or, you tell me where Silas keeps his paper ledger, the real one, the one with the crypto network." He stepped closer. "My cousin's justice, Tino, or my mercy. You have 10 seconds. Tino March dissolved. The old court, the abandoned basketball court on Ironbound. There's a cash room under the bleachers. It's all there. Antonio nodded to his head of security. "Get her the details." A moment later, Olivia, her hands now steady, made a second anonymous call, directing the ACCA to a much bigger prize. On the pier, Silas realized the operation was a total bust. He shoved his way out of the van, escaping into the smoke-filled night, running for the shadows. He scrambled over a chain-link fence, leaving a perfect, bloody handprint from a cut on the razor wire. His radio, dropped in his haste, crackled to life on the ground. Antonio's men had patched into the frequency. Silas's voice, raw with fury and panic, screamed over the channel. "He thinks he's won. He's nothing. Corsetti will lose everything. He'll lose it all when I open my mouth about North Star Diagnostics." Antonio was halfway to the door when he heard the broadcast. He stopped. North Star, the lab, the sterile fortress that held the one true secret, the victory, which had been so total only a second before, turned to ash in his mouth. He smelled it, a deeper, more intricate plot. Silas hadn't just been aiming for his business. He was aiming for his son. The name, North Star Diagnostics. Silas's threat was a precision strike. Antonio's first call wasn't to his lawyers or his security team. It was to Dr. Leda Shaw. He found her in the lab's main server room, the air humming with the sound of cooling fans. She was already shredding digital files. "He's referencing your lab. Leda, he's making it a target," Antonio said, his voice a low, controlled current of fury. "I know," Leda said, not looking up from the monitor. "He's not the first." She stopped the deletion process and turned to him, her face pale but resolved. "I have a confession to make. Antonio, it's not about your test. It's about my lab. 2 years ago, the Mibu came to me. They were building a massive off-book RICO case against the entire waterfront, including you. They wanted my database. They wanted access to the genetic material of half of Newark's citizens. You gave it to them. I refused, so they came back, not with a warrant, but with a black bag team. They borrowed my servers for a night. They copied everything. She pointed to a hard drive on her desk. But they're sloppy. I knew they were coming. I made my own encrypted, air-gapped backup of the original data. The Mibu has a snapshot, but I have the truth. Silas, Antonio said, the pieces clicking into place. How does he know? My lab technician, Leda said, her voice filled with quiet disgust. A man named Renner. He saw the Mibu's illegal access log. He knew the data was compromised. He made his own copy of the key that links the anonymous samples to the Mibu's target list. He sold it to Silas. Antonio's blood ran cold. So Silas knows. He knows everything, Leda said. He knows the Mibu has an illegal, inadmissible file. He knows your sample is in it. And he knows, thanks to Renner, that your sample and Jules's sample were tested in my lab. His plan is to claim that you used your influence to get the Mibu to tamper with the results. He'll allege you and I faked the paternity test to create a sympathetic heir and defraud your investors. It was a brilliant, poisonous lie, a lie that would not only destroy Antonio's reputation, but would paint Olivia as a co-conspirator and drag Jules into the center of a criminal case. While Antonio was dealing with the lab, Olivia was digging into the past, the Sable Motel. She'd kept everything from that time. A single, water-damaged box of receipts and papers. She found the motel folio. The charge was for cash, one night, $200. The name on the slip, scribbled by the night clerk, was Mr. Black. It was a dead end. But then she found a different file. A few months after, she had requested the motel's security footage, trying to identify the man, just in case. The motel had sent a single, grainy, time-stamped screenshot from the hallway camera. The quality was terrible. A man in a dark, wet coat, his back mostly turned. But as she zoomed in, her breath caught. His left hand was visible, resting on the check-in counter, and in that hand, illuminated by the green glow of the credit card machine, was a silver lighter. She could just make out the engraved, flowing initials, A.C. She and Antonio met at Marla Inez's office, a neutral ground fortress. They laid their two pieces of the puzzle on the desk. He was Mr. Black, Olivia said, her voice shaking as she pointed to the blurry photo. And the Mibu was already watching me, Antonio said, his face grim. That's why he was at a cheap motel, not a hotel. He was off the grid. The Mibu's surveillance must have followed him there. The realization hit all three of them at once. They weren't just investigating you, Mr. Corsetti, Marla said, her legal mind racing. They were tracking you, and their sloppy surveillance put Miss Grant at risk in the same motel. On the same night, they created this entire situation. They are the ones who put a target on her and her son, years before Silas even knew they existed. Marla didn't just file a grievance. She filed a class action lawsuit against the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau for the systemic, illegal acquisition and weaponization of genetic data. The press conference was electric. The media, which had been painting Antonio as the devil, suddenly had a new, juicier, and far more corrupt villain. The headlines shifted overnight. Bad guys aren't just at the port. Mibu sued for genetic theft. The ACCA, watching the Mibu implode, saw their chance. They were the cleaner agency, and they needed a high-profile win. They called Marla's office, requesting a formal negotiation. Here's the deal, the ACCA chief said, sitting across from Antonio and Marla. We have Silas's bloody handprint from the fence. We have his voice on the radio. We have the ledger from the basketball court. He's finished, but we want him clean. No blowback. We're pursuing him, and only him. He looked at Antonio. As for Harbor Hound, Operation Hawk is a public-facing problem. We need you to go fully, 100% legitimate. We need you to submit to an independent auditor. I'll do better, Antonio said, not missing a beat. I'm turning Harbor Hound into a clean birth cooperative, managed by the workers, and I'll submit to a full audit from North Canal Audits. This was a notoriously tough, independent firm. The books are open starting today. One more thing, Olivia said, her voice quiet but unshakable. The men turned to her. This isn't just about the port. Silas's crypto network used exploited labor, minors, people who will be left with nothing. I want a fund, an independent fund, to support every family, every child he victimized, and for Jules, for his future. What do you call this fund? The ACCA chief asked, intrigued. The Blue Finch Fund, Olivia said. Antonio looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were full of a deep, profound respect. I will be its first and primary donor, he said. The stage was set. Leda Shaw, to counter Silas's inevitable dirty lab accusation, scheduled her own press conference at North Star. Transparency, she announced in a press release. We will be demonstrating our entire chain of custody, our encryption protocols, and the source code for our matching software. We invite all experts to scrutinize our process. The net was closing on Silas. He was out of time, out of allies, and his financial network was seized. He did the only thing a cornered animal could do. He made one last, desperate, vicious lunge. He sent a single, untraceable text to a burner phone Antonio kept. The message was not for Antonio. It was for the world. Corsetti has until noon tomorrow. He brings me the boy, Jules, as insurance, a guarantee of my safe passage. If he doesn't, I leak the file that proves he faked the DNA test, that he hired the waitress to be his baby mama. And I'll make sure he loses all parental rights before the ink is dry. He'll never see the kid again. The call came at 10 in the morning. Olivia's phone rang with an unknown number, but the voice was smooth, feminine, and concerned. Miss Grant, this is Miss Gable from preschool. I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but Jules left his red backpack. And, well, we found something in the pocket, a small bag. It looks suspicious. Could you possibly meet me? I'm at the old boat mooring park off the highway. We're on a field trip. Olivia's stomach turned to ice. A plant. I'm on my way. She hung up and immediately called Antonio. He's making his move. I know. Antonio's voice was grim. He's not at the school. He's not on a field trip. I have a surveillance drone over the boat park. He's there. He's alone, but his team is blocking the exits. He paused. Jules, where is he? Safe, Olivia said, her voice hard. He's with my neighbor. She thinks it's a play date. She won't answer the door to anyone. Good. Stay there. I'm handling this. No, Olivia said, grabbing her keys. He called me. He expects me. If I'm not the one who shows, he'll know it's a trap and he'll vanish. I'm going. You do what you have to do. She hung up before he could argue. The abandoned boat park was a graveyard of rusted metal and rotting wood. Silas was waiting on a decaying pier, the wind whipping his hair. He was pacing, wired, and when he saw Olivia crest the hill, alone, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. Where is he? Silas shouted, his voice cracking. Where is the boy? He's not here, Olivia said, stopping 20 feet away. This is between you and me. You stupid woman, Silas roared, finally revealing his true, desperate plan. He wasn't the leverage. He was the insurance. You were the trade. I was supposed to trade you to Antonio for my safe passage. He doesn't care about you. He only wants the bloodline. He's wrong. Antonio's voice cut through the wind. He stepped out from behind a stack of old lobster traps, his hands empty, his dark coat flapping. He was completely, visibly unarmed. Silas spun, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife from his jacket. You came. You actually came. You're a fool. Cousin, you brought guns, I hope. I brought these, Antonio said. He held up 2 items. In his left hand, a thick, bound ledger. Tino March's full, unedited confession. The entire crypto ATM network. Every underage mule you hired. Every dollar you washed. In his right hand, he held a single, signed document. And this, the fully executed contract for the Seagull Wing Fund, which has already been transferred to an independent trust. The money you thought you could still touch. It's gone. It's already funding the families you destroyed. Silas stared. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an audit. Suddenly, The world erupted in light. Dozens of high-powered spotlights from the access road clicked on, illuminating the pier, turning the gray morning to brilliant. Artificial day. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. ACCS Silas Corsetti, you are surrounded. And with them, 3 local news vans, their cameras already rolling, broadcasting live. Antonio had invited them all. Silas looked around, his eyes wide and panicked. He was trapped, on camera, with the man he'd threatened. He did the only thing he could. He shouted at the cameras, "It's a setup. He's lying. Ask him about the lab. Ask him about North Star Diagnostics. He faked the DNA test. He paid them off. The lab is dirty." At a news studio across the city, that feed was playing on a monitor. A producer said, "That's our cue. Go to the North Star press conference. Now." The live broadcast instantly split-screened. On one side, a frantic Silas on a pier. On the other, the calm, sterile image of Dr. Leda Shaw standing at a podium to answer the accusations directly. "Doctor," Shaw said, her voice amplified in a dozen newsrooms, "I am now making our entire process public. On the screens behind me, you will see the encrypted chain of custody for every sample mentioned. You will see the source code for the matching algorithm, which is now open to public scrutiny. We are not just transparent, we are verifiable. We are answering all questions." Back at the pier, a black sedan screeched to a halt. 2 MIBU agents, the same ones who had harassed Olivia, ran toward the ACCA commander. "This scene is compromised," one shouted, trying to take control. "This is part of an ongoing MIBU investigation. We need to correct the record." "I quite agree." Marla Inez stepped directly in front of the nearest camera, her voice radiating an icy, professional anger. She held up a thick sheaf of papers, the class action lawsuit. "The MIBU is indeed investigating. They were investigating Miss Grant. They were threatening to take her child if she did not agree to illegally wear a wire to entrap Mr. Corsetti." She began to read, her voice ringing out over the audio feeds. "From the MIBU's own email, we can make sure you are seen as an unfit mother." This wasn't law enforcement, this was extortion. The narrative, the entire city's understanding of the case, flipped in that single, devastating moment. Silas saw it. He saw the ACCA officers, their faces now turned to him with cold resolve. He saw the cameras. He saw Antonio and Olivia standing together. He had lost. With a guttural scream of pure, animalistic rage, he lunged, not at Antonio. At Olivia, he would take his hostage. It was over before it began. Antonio didn't hesitate, didn't posture. He moved, inserting his body between Silas and Olivia. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't try to disarm. He simply moved in, wrapping his arms around his cousin as the knife came forward. The blade, intended for Olivia's stomach, sank deep into the thick muscle of Antonio's left forearm. There was a sharp intake of breath, but no scream. Antonio used Silas's own forward momentum, his own unbalanced rage, against him. With a powerful twist of his hips and shoulders, a move born of control, not violence, he brought Silas to the pier. The takedown was brutal, efficient, and almost completely silent. No guns were fired, no blood was spilled. Other than the dark stain spreading on Antonio's sleeve, the cameras captured it all: the mob boss, unarmed, taking a wound meant for another, and neutralizing the threat without throwing a single punch. ACCA officers swarmed in, dragging a screaming, defeated Silas to his feet and snapping handcuffs on his wrists. The public, watching live, had just seen the real villain get arrested, and it looked nothing like a gangster movie. An EMT, on site with the press, was already cutting Antonio's sleeve away. Olivia's hands were shaking so hard she could barely stand. She didn't cry. She was too angry, too relieved. She grabbed the gauze from the medic's hand and pressed it, hard against the bleeding. "You can't do that," she whispered, her voice fierce, her eyes locked on his. "You can't be that reckless. Not anymore." Antonio looked at her, his face pale from the pain, but his eyes were clear. He managed a tired smile. "I chose the way that didn't let my son see blood." He stood. The cameras rushed forward, microphones shoving into their faces. Antonio put his good arm around Olivia's waist, pulling her to his side. He faced the lights, his jacket ruined, his arm bleeding, but his voice was steady. "My name is Antonio Corsetti. You have seen the truth today. We will be fully transparent. From this moment, Harbor Hound will be clean, or it will not exist." That night, the apartment was quiet. The news was off. Antonio's arm was professionally stitched and bound, a heavy white bandage against his skin. He was sitting on the couch, and Jules, who had been read a story and had no idea of the day's events, had fallen asleep, his head on Antonio's chest, one small hand clutching a toy truck. Olivia sat beside them. She leaned over, her hair brushing his good shoulder, and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to the bandage. They were a family. They were safe. The war was over. But as Olivia looked at her son, his face peaceful in sleep, and at this man who had torn down his own empire to protect them, the final, unanswered question remained, a quiet hum in the peaceful room. Why, after all this time, had that one familiar smile found its way back to him? Against all odds, in a rain-soaked diner the next morning, the air over Newark felt different. It was clean, scoured by the storm, and quiet. "Doctor." Leda Shaw arrived at Olivia's apartment, not with a file, but with a small, archived records box. Antonio and Olivia met her at the door. Jules was sitting on the floor, happily stacking colored blocks. "The Mibu investigation has opened a lot of old boxes," Leda said, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of a scientist who had seen too much politics. "When I was cross-referencing their illegal database, I found something, a trace file from years ago." She pulled out a second envelope, this one old, the manila paper yellowed at the edges. "When you were 22, Antonio," Leda said, her eyes fixed on him, "you were treated at a highway emergency clinic during that hurricane. You had a severe gash on your arm from a piece of flying debris. They took a blood sample." "I remember," Antonio said, his voice flat. "The Mibu, in their infinite wisdom, illegally pulled that sample from the medical archives to cross-reference against their open files. They were trying to tie you to anything, even back then." Leda then looked at Olivia. At the same time, the clinic's log from the Sable Motel's emergency triage, which was just a hallway, notes an anonymous female. A small laceration on her hand, self-treated. Olivia's eyes widened. "I cut my hand on the broken vending machine glass, trying to get pretzels." "You did," Leda said, "and a paper towel you used to blot it got blown by the wind into the triage kit. It was logged as contaminated trace and filed. 2 anonymous samples, 2 ghosts, from the same storm in the same location." Leda slid 2 printouts onto the table. "The Mibu never looked, but I did. On the left is Antonio's blood type. On the right, the DNA from the contaminated trace. A perfect, symmetrical match. This wasn't a plot or a scheme. It wasn't manipulation. It was just 2 people in a storm who saved each other and then got lost." Leda opened her laptop. "The Mibu also took the motel's security footage. It was useless to them, but not to us." She pressed play. The footage was grainy, the timestamp flashing in the corner, a dark hallway lit only by a flickering generator light. It showed a young, 22-year-old Antonio, leaner, his face not yet so hard, his arm wrapped in a crude bandage. He was talking to a girl whose face was mostly in shadow. He took off his own jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The girl looked up at him, and for one brief, flickering moment, the generator light flared, illuminating her face as she smiled. It was the smile, it was Jules's smile. Antonio stood frozen, his hand gripping the back of a chair. He said nothing. He simply watched the ghost on the screen. Olivia watched him, not the screen. A single hot tear rolled down her cheek, but this time, it was not from fear. She started to laugh, a broken, watery sound of pure, impossible relief. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. She looked at Antonio, her eyes shining. "We've been a family since that night, and we never even knew." The city healed, or at least it began to Marla Inez, in a televised press conference, announced the signing of the Blue Finch Compact. Harbor Hound Recycling, as a corporate entity, was dissolved in its place. The Pierfield Clean Berth Cooperative was born, a revolutionary new model where the dock workers themselves were given shared ownership. The Blue Finch Fund was fully endowed, its future secured, managed by a board that included Dr. Leda Shaw. The ACCA quietly signed the memorandum, officially closing Operation Hawk and ending all investigations into Antonio Corsetti. Pending his continued, verifiable compliance, the MIBU, by contrast, was imploded, its leadership suspended, and the entire bureau placed under federal internal investigation for its gross misconduct. That evening, at the apartment, Antonio knelt on the floor where Jules was playing. His bandaged arm was in a sling, but his good hand was out. "This," Antonio said, his voice quiet. He held out the silver lighter, the one engraved with A.C. "This was my father's. It's not a toy. It's a reminder that fire can be used for warmth, or it can be used to burn things down. It's about the choice." Jules, with the profound seriousness of a 3-year-old, looked at the lighter. Then he looked up at Antonio. He broke into that wide, familiar, devastating smile, the one from the generator-lit hallway. "Pancakes, Papa?" he asked, pointing to the kitchen. Antonio looked at Olivia. He was smiling, too. Later, after Jules was asleep, Antonio and Olivia stood on the small balcony, the city lights of Newark spread out below them. "It won't be easy," she said, leaning her head on his good shoulder. "It was never easy," he replied. "But now, it's right." They kissed, not with the desperate, stormy passion of the fire escape or the possessive heat of the armchair. This was a promise, a commitment made by 2 adults who knew the cost, who understood responsibility, and who were choosing, together, to put their son and their community before the shadows. The rain had stopped, but a light drizzle was still falling as they stood under the awning of the Blue Finch diner a few days later. Just before the morning shift, their hands were clasped. He leaned down, and she rose to meet him. The kiss was slow, certain, and public. His hand was gentle on her waist, hers was warm on his chest. It was a kiss that promised breakfast, and school pickups, and a hard, clean day's work. The final image was of the pier. The new sign was hanging, bright against the morning sky, Pierfield Clean Berth Cooperative. The old stylized Corsetti hawk was gone. In the glass window of the diner, you could see the reflection of Jules, laughing, and reflected with him, Antonio, his arm around Olivia, looking at his son and smiling back. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share your thoughts and where you are in the comments below so we can all connect. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you want to support us further, please hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.